Thank you, Tom. It's indeed a great privilege and an honor to be here at this Smart X City Expo and to talk about Habitat 3. To begin with, I'll have a question, instead of the moderator asking a question, I would like to ask him a question. When he talks of future leaders under 40, is he talking of chronological age or the emotional age? Because, as I always say, that I don't feel like my chronological age. I feel more like my emotional age, and I feel so much younger. So given that, I have this responsibility to help the process of Habitat 3. Now, in terms of explaining the process, what I would try and do is just do the what, when, why, where, who, so that you have the full overview of what's going to happen. Now, Habitat 3 normally sounds very complicated. What exactly is it? It's not a common terminology. It's not generally that we use in our language. So, Habitat 3, as many of you would know by now, is a UN-mandated conference on housing and sustainable urban development. So it's a conference. Why 3? Because this is the third conference. Now you'll think that, of course, UN keeps organizing conferences. Why is it the third conference? This conference is rather, you can say, historic because it takes place every 20 years. The first conference was in 1976 in Vancouver, the second in 1996 in Istanbul, and the third is going to take place, and that answers where? In Quito, Ecuador, in 2016. So it's a 20-year cycle. When will it be held? It will be held between 17th and 20th of October in 2016. Now, why is it being held? As I mentioned earlier, the whole focus is on housing and sustainable urban development. But the reason is that in the Sustainable Development Goals 2030, the leaders of the world in September this year agreed on the Sustainable Development Goals, and one of the goals is Goal 11, which talks of having an inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable cities. So it's a focus on urban development. Now, earlier sort of Millennium Development Goals and others did not have a separate kind of a unit or point on urban development or urbanization. But this time, there is a specific element of urbanization. Why again? Because there is a major population move to urban areas. So there's a focus on urban areas. Major greenhouse gases in terms of the climate change that is happening in urban areas. One of the primary issues in terms of containing poverty. Now, poorer people are also moving into urban areas. When people migrate from rural to urban, poorer people also migrate. Quite often they migrate more than not so poor because they're looking for jobs, newer economic activities and others. And therefore there is this whole focus on urban areas. The urban population, which is about 55% right now, is expected to increase to almost 70 to 80%. And most of this movement, most of this urbanization is going to take place in developing countries, in Asia. So this major movement is taking place. Urban poverty is coming over there. Inclusive sort of development that we are looking forward to. So that's why urban areas have come into focus. And urban management is a key area in this, that if we are going to deal with climate change, if we are going to deal with poverty, if we are going to deal with inclusive growth, we have to focus on urban areas and urbanization. So this is the kind of rationale that that is taking place in Habitat 3. So this is the conference. Now, what do you expect to be the outcome of the conference? Is it again to be just a political declaration that yes, we must deal with poverty, we must deal with economic issues in urban areas, we must deal with transportation, we must deal with peace and security in the urban areas, or something more? Now, this time, when the UN General Assembly decided that we should have a conference, the next conference in Quito, they decided that the outcome of this conference is going to be concise, focused, forward-looking, and action-oriented outcome. So the idea this time as an outcome document for Habitat 3 is to have a very precise and action-oriented document which people can actually implement. It could be act as a guide. In addition, this time when the Sustainable Development Goals were finalized and announced, it also has an element of monitoring from time to time. So the UN is also developing a statistical monitoring system. So what we would have is essentially a monitorable outcome which can be managed. Now, once again, we have to realize that it's not going to be the same for every city, because different cities, different countries, different continents, they are at different levels of development. And therefore, this freedom is there for each of the national governments, each of the local government, the provincial governments, is to design in terms of their those outcomes that they're looking at. Now, the process that we are following in this is to really engage with all stakeholders. Because stakeholders' engagement, because this is not something which just the government can decide and consult and come to an agreement, but have as much of stakeholder participation as possible. And one of the processes that is being led in terms of the stakeholder participation is by Professor Birch in terms of the General Assembly of Partners, engaging with different stakeholders. And when you talk of urban areas, everyone is a stakeholder. So it's a very challenging task. Of course, the process that we have tried to follow is to try to do, apart from these direct engagement of stakeholders, to have, and Professor Birch will explain it further, is in terms of having the national reports, the regional reports, then the technical aspects are extremely important. So we have technical experts looking at issue papers, developing policy units, that ultimately is the expertise also that should go in terms of developing what is known as the new urban agenda. So all of us are focusing on this new urban agenda, and which would be monitorable, achievable. So while we are in Smart City Expo, we would develop a kind of a measurement which is smart, which will be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So we'll have two systems of smartness. We are doing it in Smart City Expo, but we'll also try and develop a smart measurement system so that we can really come back to people and say that, yes, this is what we set out to achieve. This is the mandate given to us, and with this mandate, this is what we are doing, and this would be reported, monitored. So this is the process that we are trying to follow. It's a engagement that is happening throughout the world. What we are doing is we are also having, apart from the national reports, regional conferences. We had the regional conference in Jakarta for the Asia and South Pacific region. We are going to have a European conference in in Prague in March. We are planning to have a Latin American conference in Mexico. So we are engaging at every level. So it's technical people, it's political level, and of course, all the other stakeholders. So this is a kind of a very broad and a brief overview of the processes that we are following. And ultimately, in this whole process, the focus is on urban citizens and on urban prosperity. That is a key idea, that how do you make cities prosperous? How do you make cities safe? How do you make cities secure? And one of the key elements, and that is something that the Secretary General for Habitat 3, Dr. Klaus, also mentioned, that earlier when we looked at urbanization, we often thought urbanization was a source of problem, was a consequence of development. But now when we look at this massive movement towards urbanization, he's focusing on really looking at urbanization as a tool for development. That you can actually do a planned urbanization, proper urbanization, which will assist development, which help people get out of poverty, will ensure that the environment is safer and cleaner. And therefore, the whole focus on urbanization, chasing and solving problems, instead of that, it's really developing a plan which will make the citizens prosperous and make the cities more livable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary General Misra. I'd like to ask now Dr. Eugenie Birch to come forward. And in the interest of full disclosure, Dr. Birch is a member of the Board of Directors of Next City. And we are thrilled to have you.
I'm thrilled to be a member of that board. At any rate, my talk I should have called, but the name is copyrighted, I should have called Stakeholder Involvement for Dummies, because basically it's a very complicated set of processes that are going on right now as we are here in Barcelona. Some very important meetings did occur, and there's a whole set of activities such as Secretary General just told you about, and I'm going to map them out for you. And I hope as you hear and see this map, you can find a place for yourself in these activities. Because even though the New Urban Agenda, which is the official document that the member states, the nations will write, they will not write this document without consulting a large variety of stakeholders, as was mentioned. So let me just take you through this, and you'll see where you can fit in. So here is a timeline for Habitat 3. And basically, the organizers of Habitat 3, who are two groups of parties. One, something called the Bureau for the Conference on Sustainable Housing and Sustainable Urbanization, which is made up of 10 representatives of 10 nations, works with the Habitat 3 Secretariat, who are full-time workers, of which Deputy Secretary General is one, steer the processes towards this meeting that will happen in Quito. And they've been very systematic and very thoughtful in how they've organized these preparatory activities in such a way as to expand engagement and capture as much of opinion coming from every sector, from the public sector at every sphere level of government, the private sector, the nonprofit sector, through various devices. So the first thing they did was to ask the nations to take stock of where they'd been since Habitat 2 and what their aspirations were for Habitat 3. And they asked the nations to fill out and create something called a national report. And they asked the nations to create national committees to help them fill out and create this national report. So your first bit of homework today is to ask yourself, do I know where my national committee is located in my national government? Okay? First thing, because that's one way that you can influence what's going into and what the national opinions are going to be as they move towards their positions on Habitat 3. Now, I can tell you from my country, anybody from the United States here? Okay, how about you? You can tell us. Yes. Okay, do you know where our national committee is? HUD, yes, thank you very much. Working with our U.S. State Department, the Department of Housing and Urban Development has appointed a national committee made up of civil society members, government agency members, and so forth to work on the national committee. Anybody else know where their national committee is? Pietro. Gotcha. This is what I do with my students. Sometimes they're sleeping, taking notes. Taking notes. Okay, at least you don't have your computer open and doing email, which is the other thing they do. At any rate, do you know do you have a national committee for Italy?
No, because we don't have one yet.
You don't have one yet? Oh, ho. This is a good thing, because what you can do is you can go to your federal government and you can say, here I am, where's your national committee? And so that's one way you can get engaged at the national level. Extremely important to do so, by the way, because in the end, it is the nations that will be setting the proposals for the new urban agenda. In addition, UN agencies will be writing regional reports, and UN Habitat will be writing a global report. And that's all in train. That's all happening now as we speak. And that's the knowledge part in this green block that you see up in the top. The next thing that's happening, and a very exciting thing happening, are creating policy through regional and thematic conferences and policy units. I'll talk about those in a minute. The third thing that's happening is engagement, different kinds of engagement, national level meetings, and global platforms that have been established, and I'll talk about those in a minute. And finally, there are the official meetings of the UN General Assembly representatives that are called fondly PrepComs, preparatory conferences, that are held at periodic times to arrange the rules of procedure for what will happen, the agenda, and so forth. There's been a lot of debate about how the meeting will be held and who's going to be allowed to speak at it and so forth. The next PrepCom is going to be in Surabaya in July, but in between, the last one was in Nairobi, in between there were a lot of things that were not decided in Nairobi. So just this week, a resolution is at something called the Second Committee of the General Assembly, and they're duking it out as to who's going to be doing what at the Habitat 3. So if you're a real UN junkie, you can find that document and watch as it gets amended and worked through. There's some very innovative things in that document. I'm not going to tell you what they are, so you'll have to go find it. And then lastly, there are other kinds of meetings that we'll be relating to. Obviously, COP21, which will happen at the end of this month, and the Zero Draft itself will come out in April. I say zero draft because as the UN processes go, what happens is, well before the meeting occurs, basically a draft is presented, and then there are opportunities for interventions by the member states and other parties, if allowed, to make suggestions as to what should be in the final draft. And so that'll happen between basically April and July. It ought to be finished, we'll see. And then by the time the meeting is held, actually most of the decisions are taken, and there'll be discussions about how to go forward with it. So you can get involved, basically. You can get involved in all of these things that I've mentioned. Your national committee. The urban dialogues are done at this round, but there'll be more dialogues later. I'll tell you about that in a minute. There are regional thematic meetings. I'll show you where there's going to be. The policy units, I'll explain in a minute. National urban forums, if your nation decides to have them, national committees. Urban thinkers, campuses, and the General Assembly of Partners. There is a partnership group with the UN Habitat called the World Urban Campaign. The World Urban Campaign initiated two special initiatives for Habitat 3. One was something called, it's kind of an odd name, but it's a great name, Urban Thinkers Campuses. That is locally called meetings to convene around a statement that the World Urban Campaign created the year before called The City We Need, which lays out principles and ideas for implementation of those principles. So these urban thinkers campuses are happening in 29 places around the world to discuss how to amplify that document and contribute it to the second special initiative, which is the General Assembly of Partners, which is made up of 14 partner constituent groups, which I'll explain in a minute, which will take all those 29 outcomes plus other outcomes and create its document to submit to the Bureau. The policy issue paper and policy unit matrix, which is here sketched for you, is basically a really brilliant way of organizing the information that will provide the basis for the new urban agenda. Across the top, you see 6 big topics which would be of concern to people who are concerned with sustainable urbanization and housing, everything from social cohesion to urban housing to urban ecology to urban frameworks to spatial development to urban economy. Under those rubrics, several months ago, the Habitat Secretariat commissioned papers called issue papers that were written by the various agencies within the whole UN system, as well as UN Habitat folks, to deal with 22 issues that fell under each one of these topics. For example, in the spatial development area, there were 4 papers, one dealing with urban planning, one dealing with rural-urban linkages, one dealing with land, and what was the 4th one, Pietro? Oh, caught you again. Land? And land. At any rate, from these papers, as you can see, I've not named them, but you can go on the website and find them. They've been collected into topics, and 10 policy units have been created. The policy units are meant to take those papers and other information and make actionable recommendations to the Secretariat, which will then be conveyed to the member states as how to sort of lay out some of the issues of the new urban agenda. And I'd like to present to you one of the chairs of a policy unit, Pietro Garau, who has a big job of rounding up 20 so-called experts, they are experts, to come up with the policy unit representations for spatial frameworks. For each of the 10 policy units, 20 experts have been chosen from around the globe. How are they chosen? The member states were asked to make recommendations of experts from their arenas, from their countries, as well as civil society organizations submitted nominations, and using certain criteria, geographic balance, gender, expertise, and so forth, these experts were assigned to the policy units. The first meetings of the policy units have just begun. We had the first one on spatial frameworks, in-person one on spatial frameworks just earlier this week in the beautiful São Paulo hospital. It was very hard to concentrate in those environments, but it was a very productive meeting, and other ones are going on. Ultimately, when all the work is done of these 10 policy units, they'll all be brought together in a sort of mini Habitat 3 to discuss their findings and put them forward as a consolidated document. So that work is going on. The other piece of work that's going on that you can, and oh, by the way, on the policy units, the findings will be put online and you'll be able to comment. I meant to say that the dialogues will be opened up again. You'll be able to comment on what the recommendations are. So keep an eye on the Habitat 3 website. Then there are 11 meetings that are happening around the world. They're happening according to themes, as you can see in the top, the list of themes that we have here. And there are regional meetings, some of which have already happened and will continue to happen over the course of the next few months. Again, these meetings will be open. You can go to them. You can contribute to them. And every single one of these meetings, by the way, is going to issue its own declaration as to what it thinks should go into the new urban agenda. So you can see this massive amount of material is being developed, as well as a massive citizen, expert, participant platform of people who are engaged in thinking about what a new urban agenda means. This is really remarkable. This has never happened before to this extent, this early in the game. Sure, there have been citizens and other opinions at the meetings, but never before in this systematic way, in this broad-gauged way, has this kind of outreach occurred. And this is very, very exciting to be part of the urban world today. So again, watch the websites. You can go to these meetings. You can be part of it. National Urban Forums, watch your nation and see what's happening there. So let's now talk a little bit about the General Assembly of Partners, because today I could sign you up, all right? So if you want to I'll be at the door, and I'll take your names, and you can be part of it if you want to. It's really exciting. At any rate, the World Urban Campaign has these purposes, as you can see. The Urban Thinkers campuses, again, open, free to attend. They just had one here in Barcelona, Monday and Tuesday of this week. I see the leader of that in the back, Ishmael. Raise your hand. He had and his compadres, I'm sorry, I don't see who else is here. At any rate, they focused on housing. They presented their material this morning, and indeed, representatives of the mayor of Barcelona was there to also present the material on what Barcelona is doing on thinking about housing. And this material will bring itself into the work of the General Assembly of Partners in a second document called The City We Need 2.0. So you can see 29 campuses, 38 cities, 24 countries, really very, very exciting in terms of what's happening there. Now let's turn to the General Assembly of Partners. So the material from the Urban Thinkers campuses will then filter into this meeting, this grouping, and you can see the 14 constituent groups here. The UN recognizes what they call 9 major groups. They're listed here, not exactly by title, but they're represented here in these groups. But we, who are concerned with sustainable urbanization, felt that somehow some of the there were gaps in that list, and so we added 5 more to that list, including media, including grassroots organizations, including foundations and philanthropies, parliamentarians, and so forth. So each one of these groups has chairs and co-chairs and is meeting to create what they believe should go into the new urban agenda, and then we meet periodically. You can see this sort of graphic as to how GAP is going to be contributing to the new urban agenda, getting the information from the city we need, the other inputs from other organizations, and so forth, and we'll be putting together an outcome document itself, which is now decided and crafted what it will be, which will be a series of multi-stakeholder partnerships that the GAP will present as promises to the member states and say to the member states, look, we really commit to do these things, but we need your help. We need your help in providing the enabling environment to do this. So we can partner as we move forward in our thoughts about what might a new urban agenda have. So we've had these meetings where we've organized and came up with our modus vivendi. We'll have more meetings in Prague, Jakarta, and of course, Quito. And the partner constituent groups are organized by their chairs. But as I said, I'll be at that door if you want to join. We'd love to have you because your opinions count, and it's really important. And then this is the process by which we will come up with our outcome document. Too many words, we're not going to read them. But here is where we are today. Here are the various processes. You can see that we barely have 6 months. It's really 5 months to get going here. So there's this great urgency in pulling ourselves together, pulling up our socks, and getting running, because it is really a really exciting time to be part of the engagement platforms that are in existence. There's a second engagement platform, and I'm sorry Dr. Roig is not here. He had another commitment. And that second engagement platform is something called the Global Task Force on Local Authorities and Subnational Governments. And that's a coordinated group dealing with local government officials and so forth, who also are creating an engagement platform, an organization platform among their group. So both the General Assembly of Partners and the Global Task Force report regularly to the Bureau about our activities and, of course, receive encouragement and suggestions as how to go forward. So we are definitely being watched and partnering and being part of this process. So, see you in Quito.
Thank you, Dr. Birch, and we all have homework, right? So as we go from this class moving forward, I will summarize later on a number of things that we need to do, but your first assignment is to sign up for GAP. Your second assignment when you get home is to find out about your national committee, and your third assignment is to read your national report, and if it's not been written yet, be part of that process. Absolutely. So thank you again, Dr. Birch. And I am thrilled also to be member of one of those 10 policy units, the National Urban Policies Expert Group meeting. We just had ours in Paris last week. And fortunately, it happened before the tragedies have happened, but we did actually experience the tragedies right after that session. And it starts a whole nother conversation that we will have to have about how do you actually plan a new urban agenda in an era of war. We need to think a bit about that as we move forward. But I am really pleased at this point, on a more optimistic note, to introduce Dr. Pietro Garau, who's going to talk about saving the planet by design and how cities in particular can lead the way. Again, as I mentioned, Dr. Garau is the international curator for the Rome Biennial Public Space.
Good afternoon. I'm very, very pleased to be here. And I was also very happy to hear the two presentations that preceded me, because my little bit is going to be about something slightly different, but that I think hopefully will complete the two presentations that were made before. Yes, I have, in addition to being involved in this very exciting project, which is the Biennial of Public Space, which is held every odd year in Rome. I've also worked for Habitat for quite a number of years, and in fact, at one point, I was involved in the previous conference, the Habitat 2, as director of the Habitat 2 Secretariat. That is the group of staff members of Habitat and other partners that was put together in order to organize this major event. Which brings me to the decision not to tell you my ethnographic age. I can tell you my emotional age, if you like, which normally ranges, as you know, between 28 and 31 years, more or less. Let's get. Well, Jeannie says 15 because, as you probably noticed, she probably addressed me a couple of times as I were one of her students, which I consider an honor and a privilege, by the way. So, if I manage to find out how I proceed with these slides, oh, it works. Smart. Now, as Tom Dallessio mentioned to you, the theme of my presentation is actually the same as the presentation that I had the privilege of having at the recently concluded celebrations for World Cities Day in Milan. This celebration took place in Milan at the 31st of October, which is World Cities Day. And it coincided with the conclusion of the Milan Expo, the Expo 2015. The title of this very short talk is Cities, Saving the Planet by Design. Now, this by design is meant to be, although I'm not a native speaker of English, as you probably noticed, it's meant to be a pun. That is, saving the planet intentionally, and at the same time, saving the planet through planning and design of cities and of the urban fabric. I will start with some statistics. Dr. Misra already mentioned to you the fact that most of the world's urban population will live in the cities of the developing countries. But here is some startling statistical facts drawn from the projections, from the UN projections on population growth. In essence, what this table shows us is that over the next 35 years, 96% of the population growth of the planet will be living in the cities of the developing countries. 96%, corresponding to more or less 2.3 billion people. Now, this gives us an idea of the dimension of the Habitat 3 challenge, and incidentally, it doesn't cover it all, because we have also to think of cities that have to renovate themselves, regenerate ample areas within their built-up environment, and so on and so forth. But I think this statistic in itself is enough to justify the urgent need for a global conversation, as Tom Dallessio would probably name it, on the future of cities and how we can handle city and urban challenges. One of the problems that we have about addressing urban in a positive way is that for some reason over the past 50, 60 years or so, cities have been having a bad name. All sorts of awful things have been customarily and repeatedly associated to cities for a number of decades. And I chose this slide from my archives because it's quite cute. It's an event that we organized for Habitat in Geneva in 1997, 1 year after the conclusion of the Habitat 2 conference. And it was the city saying, "Pourquoi parlent-ils si mal de moi?" Why do they speak so badly about me? What have I done wrong? And as I will try to demonstrate, cities have done a lot of things right. Now, for example, there are cities around the world that have been planned. Manhattan is a great example of a planned city, and to this day is a city that works rather well. Of course, there are a number of problems. We know that housing in New York City, for example, is extremely expensive. That most people of low income cannot afford to live in Manhattan or even near Manhattan, but by and large, it's a city that works well. And it is also a surprisingly eco-friendly city because it is densely built, it is compact, and therefore it's highly economic in terms of space, in terms of energy consumption, in terms of reduction of mobility for the people who use the city itself. And of course, it is dense and big enough to justify, and this is the virtuous cycle of the densely populated city, to justify those services. They make the city efficient and effective. For example, good mass transit systems. Now, another example of urban growth and development that has been severely criticized and stigmatized over the past, again, 50 years or so, are the slums. This is the picture, the mental picture that all of us have of slums in the developing world. Place of squalor, disease, bad health, deprivation of all possible basic needs that we attach to adequate living in today's world. Yes, slums can be like that, and some of them are quite like that, but there is also another image, another characteristic of slums which in a way negates this sight, an image of squalor. This is a picture taken in Accra, in Ghana, 3 or 4 years ago. You see two women walking around and selling on the way to the market to sell their goods. So slums, or let's say low-income settlements in developing countries, are also places where people work, where people live, where people work, where people somehow manage to have an income. And let's not forget that the poor in the developing world, by definition, have to work. They're all working people, because if you don't work, if you don't find a source of income in a developing country, well, you have a very bad prognosis. Again, another picture from Accra. This is a good picture to show in the Smart City exhibition. Glorified Communication Center, Accra, Ghana. See, there are people who organize phone calls, cheaper phone calls to other countries of Africa and so on and so forth. And this is a tremendous sign of dynamism and entrepreneurship and will to be active and positive, regardless of your living circumstances. Another, of course, characteristic of the slum is that, in my view, as some sort of sanctuary. Let us keep in mind that people who live in slums in the developing world are not interested in housing as such. They interpret their living conditions as the cheapest living conditions possible in order to upgrade and improve their chances, their opportunities to create a better lives for themselves. But of course, we don't want slums to remain as they are. We want to improve them as much as possible. But at the same time, let's say the narrative or policies regarding slums have luckily, and also thanks to the policies introduced and defended by Habitat, we have moved from a policy of eradication and eviction to a policy of regeneration and upgrading of existing slums. And slum settlements, of course, those that, apart from those that settlements that exist in very dangerous conditions for the inhabitants, like flood-prone areas or hillsides and the like. Now, this is a picture of, This is a picture of a dream house, at least from the point of view of the real estate company that designed it. But it's characteristic of the way we do not want to go, and we cannot afford to go. That is a kind of global settlement where each family takes much more land than it needs, lives in settlement conditions, obviously, that require the continuous and exclusive use of a motor car, in isolation from others, and in conditions that require enormous investments for infrastructure, for energy, for water, for services, for all the things that we require in modern life. And this is why the city, the compact city, and I go back to my thesis, is the solution also to the climate change and to the saving the planet predicament. Now, going back though to that 96%, we know though that this challenge is not won just because it will be placed and will have to be fought in cities. It will depend a lot on how we shall be able to regenerate existing cities and provide planned environments for the 2.3 billion people who are going to populate the cities of the world between now and the year 2050. And so this is where saving the planet by design comes in. I'm concluding my talk with two examples from the same city. I was recently in Rio de Janeiro, and I had the opportunity to visit the newest and fanciest development, residential development in the city of Rio de Janeiro. I don't know if any of the audience is from Brazil or from Rio de Janeiro. This settlement is called, neighborhood is called Barra da Tijuca. And it's the latest new development south of the city. like in many other cities, the poor stays in the north, the rich live in the south, or the rich live in the south and the poor stays in the north. But these areas are usually quite well divided. Now, this is a dense environment, a complex environment. It's also a disgusting urban environment. It is a disgusting urban environment because it's planned and designed very badly. So having compact and dense cities is not enough. We need well-planned and well-designed cities. Do we need enormous and incredible means, technologies, scientific advances in order to plan and design the better cities of tomorrow? Yes and no. My no comes from the last example I'm going to show, which is Ipanema. It's a neighborhood. We all know about it, of course, because some of us have been there. We know the song. We know that Tom Jobim and Vinicius de Moraes lived in this neighborhood and had a jolly good time and composed beautiful songs, etc., etc. Yes, Ipanema was developed as a, let's say, middle upper income neighborhood in Rio de Janeiro. But the interesting thing about Ipanema is that it is a dense and compact neighborhood. Population density in Ipanema is comparable to the one of Barra de Tijuca, but it's a very livable city. And why is it livable? Well, first of all, because it has streets. Streets. Ample sidewalks, trees, benches. This is a picture shot at random, by the way. I didn't go around Ipanema looking for a bench. It was there. Full of shops, not all fancy shops. Many of them are cheap restaurants or places to eat, just like the ones you find happily in Barcelona. And rather high buildings, like 9 or 10 floors. A very clear grid and layout of streets. You do not get lost in Ipanema. You know where to go and in what direction to take. The subway is not very far away. And in the opposite direction, you can see the sea. And you can see, not only you can see the sea, you can use the sea because the beach, as you know, in Ipanema, as well as in other parts of Rio, is free. There's free access to the beach area. So these are not extraordinarily sophisticated ways to design a city. They are fairly simple. And this probably shows that perhaps an intelligent, we're in the smart city, we're talking about really intelligent planning and design, that there is a way to adopt intelligent design in order to plan and build the cities of tomorrow, and that for this kind of city building, you do not need excessive resources. It's a simple design, it's a simple layout, and it does not require enormous investments in the sense of sophisticated technology, sophisticated and expensive building technology, and the like. You see us, we see you, but you don't see this thing here. Now, it is an infernal device. It's very useful, incidentally, which tells me I have 1 minute and 54 seconds left for my presentation. If I go past this limit, I will see a horrendous red number blinking, 60, 59, 58, 57, and then a sign, a huge sign, 00, fixed, red, huge, enormous. Luckily, I will not talk long enough to find out what happens after the 00 sign. But let me use the 1 minute that I have left to read to you the last paragraph of this World Cities Day presentation. To think that this goal is beyond us, that is the goal of planning the good city, the intelligent city, with advances that knowledge, communication, and technology have made would be absurd. It's absurd to think that in this world, in this technology that we have, the devices and the technology and the wisdom and the knowledge that we have, that we cannot build a decent world for everybody. But this goal will not be reached by letting things go on their own. When we look at most of today's urban agglomerations from the air, we only wonder at how a human race that came up with airplanes that fly faster than the speed of sound, drugs that can cure and prevent virtually any major illness, and machines that work faster and more efficiently than the human brain could produce cities that even at miles from the ground, over the ground, reveal themselves for what they are: giant, clumsy, lost opportunities. So we must convince ourselves that trend is not destiny. And most of all, we must, I think, educate ourselves to demand, not simply wish for, to demand equitably, sustainably, functionally, beautifully planned cities. Only this way, that is, if we can organize demand. By demand, I mean people really, getting involved, asking for better places to live. Only this way will urbanists, architects, administrators, and enlightened entrepreneurs also find the push and the moral resolve to give us what we all deserve and owe to the next generations, cities that will save the planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Garau. As we plan in particular towards the road to Habitat 3, we go straight through COP21. And so I encourage all of you to be part of that process. Next city will actually be covering COP21 as well as PrepCom 3 and Habitat 3. So we encourage you to stay involved. We have about 7 minutes at this point for questions. If anyone has any questions, please come up to the microphone here. And what I'd like to do is ask you to ask the question, introduce yourself, ask the question, and then we'll go through and identify all the questions, and then we'll answer them. So folks could come up. If they have a question, please feel free to do that. And while I'm waiting for folks to come up, I will just briefly identify some of the key points that I heard that I thought were worth noting as we go through. So we appreciate that Kumaresh had talked a bit about, in particular, how to focus on urban areas, and that the challenging task that we have is the road to Quito. And in particular, I appreciated your comment about measurements that are smart. So as we look at smart cities and the Smart Cities Expo, the whole paradigm of how to use smart measurements is critically important. That urban citizens and urban prosperity are key to all of this, and in particular, urbanization as a tool for development that Dr. Close has reminded us about is key. Dr. Birch, in particular, taking us through Habitat 3 and the stakeholder involvement for dummies. Well, all of us should at least get an A for paying attention, because it's an incredible presentation we heard. It is a complex process, but all of you have a role to play in it. And again, I think Dr. Birch has challenged all of us to be more involved, in particular to pay attention to what our nations are doing and to make sure that we be engaged. If we can't be in Surabaya in Indonesia for PrepCom 3 or for Quito for Habitat 3, to follow it online and to be engaged through social media and other means. And that, in fact, COP21 and the Zero Draft are the next key indicators as we go forward. So pay attention to all of that. And then also, please pay attention to the issue papers and the policy units and the work that we're all doing. We need your help and your comments on that. And then concluding with Dr. Garau and his comments in particular about saving the planet through design, that's music to my ears as we're going forward. I love that. And in particular, thinking about design not just as a physical exercise, but as a process. And I know in particular, Dr. Close talks about design being not just laying out cities and not just designing buildings and public plazas, but also designing processes and ensuring that we actually have things like public beaches, that we have safe spaces, that we actually have places you want to be in, that you're encouraged to be in, that you are a part of creating the process. I very much believe that those of us who are a part of a process of creating spaces have ownership, and when you have ownership of something, you take better care of it. So if we could all take better care of our planet, because we really do own it, it leaves to the next generation something we're proud to leave them as we're moving forward. Statistics that Dr. Garau mentioned, again, 96% of all the growth that will happen in the next number of years towards 2050 will happen in Africa and in Asia, in developing cities, critically important moving forward. And that, in fact, as we look at cities around the world, there are examples. We don't have to look too far. Not only see the good, but also see the bad, not only to learn the lessons, but also create the opportunities as we go forward, and that we do encourage you to be part of that the compact city is the solution to climate change. So as we do intelligent planning and design, and we follow Dr. Rowe's prognosis of educating ourselves to demand better design, we ask you to be more involved. Are there any questions from the public you'd like to ask our panel? Yes, please. Please come to the microphone.
Hi, I just have a question. So you talked a lot about, I'm Kalina, by the way, I'm with a startup at 4 Years From Now Village, if you want to come by later. I was wondering, you talked a lot about innovation. However, could you also use all this new technology maybe to fix some of the ugly, some of the horrible planning that has happened in the past, but now with this new knowledge, maybe it can also not be used just to build and further plan, but to fix some of the issues. Does that make sense?
And we have microphones here, if we could take that.
It makes eminent good sense, of course. And how will we use it? If you went this morning to the Citizens Empowerment panel that was moderated by Rosa Serenak, who's sitting in the front row here, and some of the speakers may be in the room, I can't tell, you would hear the various ways in which mobile applications, for example, are soliciting citizen opinions about what kind of decisions local government should be making in terms of urban projects. So that's one way, going from the very sort of small scale application. And we can take it all the way up to outer space and think about the geospatial technologies now that are being developed. For example, through the European Union's Joint Research Council, we will have, by October 2016, an entire inventory of the built environment of the globe based on satellite imagery. That will be overlaid on an application that's being developed at the University of Southampton called WorldPop that distributes population at 100-meter units so that we'll know generally where the built environment is and how many people are in that built environment. Why is that important? Because in many places of the world, many nations, much less cities, don't even know how much built environment they have, and they don't know how many people are living within their bounds. So from the most basic applications of citizen involvement to the highest technical means of gathering data for judging smart indicators, we're on our way. And any of you who are involved in these kinds of applications and activities really have a role in contributing those to the kinds of analysis we need.
Can I add?
Please.
Yes, I agree. It's a very interesting question, also considering the premises and the subject of this great get-together, the World Expo on smart cities. Two things come to my mind. Well, maybe I just confine myself to the first one. The so-called social networks or social are actually incredibly powerful means for, particularly for young people, as we know, to get together, to exchange ideas, to stay in touch with each other, etc., etc. And perhaps this instrument should be used more specifically that is, in addition to the wonderful objective of staying close to one another, to exchanging ideas, to showing each other what is going on, the wonderful things we're doing, what about using, this is an idea that came to me now, I will probably be driven out of the premises for saying this, but why don't we use these social networks for a new urban spring?
Yes.
Urban Spring.
Urban
Very
Spring.
good.
I love it. That's great. Yes, please. One more question. Come forward. If you could identify yourself. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Gaia. I have a background in sustainable development and climate change, and recently worked leading on a project called Cognicity. We are helping the creation of smart cities in London, particularly Canary Wharf. Anyway, booth around the corner. We can have other conversation. First of all, thank you so much for such an interesting panel. I appreciate all of your comments, and I truly believe that we can change urbanization. However, considering the photos that you have shown, we often forget that a lot of the global south does not consider in urbanization all of the slums as part of their urban design. So how are we going to avoid having to constantly retrofit in probably 20 years' time massive urbanized slums, but we could start from the beginning and starting to think about how are we going to cater for the poorest of the poor that will go and live in these massive cities, but unfortunately, unless they have very forward-thinking mayors that will start to urbanize and do all of the various projects, they will be relegated to the south and the slums, and unfortunately, yes. So please.
Thank you very much. Yes, please, Pietro, if you could start, and then we'll work backwards. Thank you.
Well, as we mentioned before, trend is not destiny. I mean, of course, we have to deal, even the expression we deal, I don't like very much, deal with slums. But we have to take stock of the fact that, yes, that although we will have 2.3 billion new people between now and the year 2050, we have a considerable stock of built environment. And of course, slums around the world take up a considerable portion of the built environment. So what do we do? What's the best way to deal with existing low-income settlements in our cities, and how can we prevent the formation of new slums? This is incidentally a major concern of Habitat 3 conference. Yes. Dr. Kloss speaks very often about this challenge. Well, as I said before, the general consensus about how to plan or replan or retrofit existing slums is precisely to retrofit them. There are complex problems because the first issue that one has to approach is that of security of tenure. But once that is assured or guaranteed in many forms, which do not necessarily coincide with individual property rights, there are a variety of means that can be used to guarantee security without necessarily making massive property transfers. And then soft interventions in the slums with the purpose of disturbing, let's use this term, as few people as possible, with the idea that somehow people who have living consolidated in formal settlements in the cities have established a right, if not a legal right, but certainly an ethical right to stay there. As far as the new development is concerned, again, we have to plan. Now, we can plan badly, we can plan stupidly, we can plan intelligently, we can plan in a human way, we can plan in an inhuman way, such as Barra de Tijuca, which incidentally is a concentration camp for the rich and not for the poor, which is a bit ironic, right? But we can do it, and there are many ways of doing it. Land, of course, is a necessary precondition because affordable land has to be made available to accommodate for low-income new citizens, but there are ways to do it. Self-help building techniques can be used, and this is where, incidentally, the technology sophistication goes hand in hand with looking for intelligent and low-cost solutions.
Yes.
Yes to everything. Pietro says. However, and in addition, remember 60% of what we expect to be the built environment is yet to be built. We are at an inflection point. Why do you think we have this enormous, broad-gauged participation engagement process? It's educational. It's to build up the call for guided development in this 60% that has to be built or will be built. That's what we're about. We need you. When we say, come join us, it's not because we want to have a big party. It's because, well, we'd like to do that too.
Right.
It's because we need the voices of everyone saying, stop. We must have a better new agenda.
And final comments from Deputy Secretary General Misra.
So at this point, I would not like to venture an answer, but I hope the new urban agenda, which will be negotiated and decided upon by member states, would have a very clear-cut answer to the issue that you have raised. Thank you.
Thank you. And to close this session, just to again remind everyone that we are working together towards a new urban agenda. We ask you to be part of that process. I look forward to a year from now, the next Smart City Expo here in Barcelona, where actually we will have already completed Habitat 3. And all of us will be smiling and have a lot to talk about. But it will just be one more step on the road. And as we then plan for the World Urban Forum 9 in Kuala Lumpur, we will have hopefully examples of implementation moving forward. I would like to leave you, though, with the reminder that Dr. Garau had reminded us about. Trend is not destiny. You are destiny. You are the future. You need to make the future we all want to see. And as I look at this room and I see wonderful faces, people full of energy, I am actually very optimistic. One could leave last weekend feeling very, very depressed about things. I don't. I leave today with an optimism because all of you will help us create the world we want to see. Thank you all. Let's thank our panel. We appreciate this. And again, if anyone has any interest in Vanguard, please come forward. I'll be glad to give you information. Thank you again.